Thanks for that intro, Andrew. I am Bilal Fazal, joined here by Kris Vincent, and we are part of the site reliability engineering team at the USA Today network. And today, we're really excited to walk you all through our journey of architecting an entire API management solution on the top of Fastly Edge and going through different features and architecture of that solution. All right, so before we dive into the topic today, I want to tell you a bit about our organization. So what is the USA Today network? It's a portfolio of hundreds of local media outlets in 46 states across the country, with usatoday.com being the most recognized national brand. We have a reach to over 140 million consumers, and that makes us one of the largest media outlets in the country. And with this scale of traffic, you can imagine what kind of challenges it poses for us when it comes to technology and platform in the organization. And some of those challenges and technology decisions, we're going to talk about those in the context of the topic today. So to start off, what is API management? API management essentially is a tool and layer that sits between a bunch of front-end clients and a collection of back-end applications. So the primary purpose of this tool is to provide security and visibility into your back-end applications. And features such as key authentication, WAF, rate limiting, you can apply those to your API layer in order to prevent your back-end services from overuse and abuse. So before we dive into the journey of the project, to take you back to 2019, when we started developing this product, how did API management look like for us back in 2019? Well, we had been facing a lot of challenges in the API management space. We had switched in and out of a handful of API solutions in a matter of short handful years. And we had challenges in many different aspects of these API solutions. First off, we had a lot of challenges in adapting to a new framework. Every time we would have to understand a new framework, a lot of times spending countless engineering hours to help migrate our customer teams to the new product. And we always felt that we don't have a full sense of control over the overall development, deployment, and production lifecycle when it came to these vendors. And there was always a sense of kind of a black box around these solutions. We wanted to have our solutions support multi-tenancy, but as a result, our customer teams ended up having to manage complex configuration files and with a lack of automation and all that. And lastly, the most recent API product that we were using got acquired by another organization. And upon discovering that there's going to be a significant increase in operating costs, and apart from that, some other issues that we had with that vendor, the management gave us the green light to start evaluating other solutions. So the mission from the management was very clear. Replace the previous product, definitely. Make it more manageable. And that encompasses a lot of factors underneath that we're going to be going over further in the presentation. Don't break the bank, and definitely don't increase the overall response times. So we took that mission to our heart and started evaluating our options, as well as started gathering the core engineering requirements for us. We need the new API solution to be extensible and usable by many different teams working in parallel. So multi-tenancy was going to be a core requirement for us. And we can't talk about multi-tenancy if it's not going to support self-service along with that. So we need to be able to build automation and framework around this solution where our customer teams can come in and start managing their own API configurations, as well as roll out new API products with minimum oversight by the SRE team. With self-service, as you know, comes the challenge of standardization. So we also need to build certain frameworks and boilerplates around our solution that will help not only to support the customer teams to develop on their own, but also keep within the frame of certain coding practices so that it doesn't become a management and engineering nightmare for the SRE team, who's kind of the managing team for the solution. And lastly, we definitely need this API solution and management solution to be highly resilient, because this solution is taking in traffic and requests from multitude of production-facing services. So we need this to be scalable. We need this to be highly redundant and highly available across different geographical regions, especially in the regions where we have the peak traffic areas for USA Today. So how did we go from there and end up on Fastly? So the answer was right in front of us. Even back in 2019, we had been using Fastly in a very highly critical, high-capacity production environment for many years. And we had a very good understanding of the Fastly tools and technologies. And we realized that a lot of the core requirements that we are putting together are going to be fulfilled around some tools and frameworks that we can build around Fastly. First off, building an API management solution on Fastly meant that we will be able to eliminate that additional piece of infrastructure out of our bigger infrastructure and platform. So we will be able to bring the API management solution right next to our front-end applications that are managed on Fastly. And as you all know, when the services are together in the same POPs and servers, we are serving our requests and really eliminating additional network hops. And so we knew that we're going to be able to improve response time significantly. And speaking of infrastructure, we as a news company, we deal with unpredictable events, changing patterns of traffic all the time. And in our experience, we had the experience of working on a very scalable and resilient infrastructure that Fastly provides us right on the edge. Along with that, I think Todd mentioned around the network infrastructure of Fastly. And yeah, I mean, Fastly provides a large array of POP locations around the US and also global locations. And that gives us that ability wherever we implement a solution on Fastly Edge, we can be as close to our customers and end users as possible based on those regions. And as we had been using Fastly for quite some time, we had built these mature pipelines and frameworks and standard practices around Fastly, which enabled us to have a full control of our deployment, development, and production lifecycle. So we had a very good control and sense of control when it came to rolling out a product and also managing it on the Fastly Edge. And along with that, the visibility we had along with working with these frameworks, we had integrations into logging vendors such as Sumo and BigQuery, so we had a good feeling about that. And then lastly, the vendor relationship that we already had cultivated with Fastly. We had been close partners, and we have been close partners with Fastly throughout these years, ranging from technical support all the way to the product roadmap. Fastly has been always very transparent with providing their vision and communication, and also taking in our feedback when it comes to their existing products, as well as the products that are in the development pipeline. So overall, we were comfortable as well as confident in building out our API management solution right on the Fastly Edge. So as we started to design this product, we were able to highlight some key tool sets that we're going to be incorporating in order to start building this product, right? So we use Terraform all across the organization for our configuration management and automation. Within Fastly, the core tool sets that we identified for building out the API management: VCL, private edge dictionaries. VCL, as you all know, that was going to be our core configuration endpoint for the ingress traffic coming in, trying to access our API backends, what to do with those requests, how to manipulate those, rewrites and caching strategies, and whatnot before routing those requests back to the respective backends. Along with that, we need a key storage place for our API management, because we will be implementing key authentication. So we identified private edge dictionaries as well as Vault to store those keys. Kris is going to go over those in more detail in a bit. And Fastly has great stats and dashboard for visibility into understanding your services. Along with leveraging those, we've built some cool integrations between Fastly and our logging endpoints, such as BigQuery, New Relic, and Sumo Logic. And that gives us that visibility into our API layer and services based on wide array of different parameters and headers and custom headers and whatnot. So, and lastly, building it on the Fastly Edge meant that we'll be able to leverage a lot of the coolest and the newest features and products that Fastly is using. One example is rate limiting that earlier this year we were testing it out in our API solution in beta. And rate limiting is a very essential part of a solution like the API management where we're seeing traffic at a very large scale. With WAF, we are actually in discussions even right now with Fastly. We're evaluating the next-gen WAF, which is powered by Signal Sciences. And we're excited about that because having that ability to manage those security policies from one central location and then roll them out not only to our API solution, but our hundreds of other applications from that one place, so that can provide that seamless central place to manage those. And now to discuss the more intricate details and features of our API solution, I'm going to pass it along to Kris.
Thanks, Bilal. So like Bilal said, we really took that mission to heart of replacing that previous product. And like Bilal mentioned, Fastly made the most sense for us to do that. So we created what we call Fastly API Management. I'm going to be calling it FAM from this point forward. That's what we call it internally. So before we get into the technical details, I want to talk about what FAM is doing today. So currently, FAM as a product is serving around 4 billion requests per month. That is billion with a B. That is a lot of requests to go through one Fastly service. So we are definitely relying on them for securing that edge, making sure that all of those requests are going through. We're getting all those logged. So there's a lot of data and information that comes from those things. We're servicing 90-plus applications. I think we just hit over 100 in the last week. We're servicing 15 different teams internally, so we have a lot of different teams coming on board to this, using our simple configuration platform to be able to come on board quickly. Overall, FAM as a service has less than a 1% error rate, so we're definitely making sure to monitor that and give teams the ability to dig into their specific applications' error rates. And we're a continuous deployment, continuous development shop over here at Gannett, so we're definitely deploying to FAM as well as our other Fastly services multiple times per day. So I'm going to go through a few of the features that we were able to roll into FAM. One of the biggest ones obviously being authentication and API key management. Any API gateway is going to have this. But one of the big features I want to talk about here is as we're creating keys, we go through GitHub Actions. You just kind of pull down a workflow, put in the information that you need. A key is generated for you. It's then put in Vault as well as the Edge dictionaries on Fastly for you to be able to access in the workflow. The cool part that we do with this, though, is as we put those keys into Vault and the Edge dictionaries, we attach some metadata to those keys as well. This gives our teams some very logical, actionable items to be able to partition off traffic. You can start to do rate limiting based on API keys. You can know which application your traffic's coming in on. And you can use your UUID to start to do log tracing all the way through to your backend. We're tagging all of those requests all the way through our entire stack. Routing and load balancing, obviously, Fastly has a great infrastructure to be able to route our requests to where they need to go. So this top request here, this api.usatoday.com/elections, we obviously had our elections event last night, so we had a lot of traffic coming into this particular application. But what we're doing in FAM is allowing teams to partition off particular URL spaces. So in this case, elections. This would route to their elections application. But teams are able to bring their own DNS, and they have a variety of ways to be able to get their traffic to their application. One of the other features that we're really happy to take advantage of is the POP locations around the country. We actually logically partition those out in how our traffic works in our landscape. So if we have Seattle or Denver traffic, we're going to route those things to our West Coast servers, maybe Miami or New York to our East Coast. But we're able to set up more like centralized locations and then direct traffic to our backend servers just based on where that traffic is coming in on the Fastly edge. The next thing we want to talk about is request manipulation. This one is a very flexible topic. There's a lot that teams are able to do. As they build out their application for FAM, they have a complete VCL file that they can have as much flexibility to modify requests as they would like. So for example, the elections team had an endpoint that was v1/data and say that they upgraded that to v2. FAM can handle that for them. They don't need to tell their front-end customers. They can start to send that traffic over just at this layer, and then their back-end application only needs to handle that one back-end request. One of the other things we see a lot of teams doing is taking things like URL parameters. If you throw API keys in there, that's not super secure. So we give them the ability to re-put those in as headers before that goes to the back end. Just secures that layer one extra step. But the cool thing here is, again, just allowing teams as much flexibility as they need to control their request as it comes through to their applications. Rate limiting, we're going to quickly touch on this one. Rate limiter is a new feature that we were betaing for Fastly. We were able to roll that directly into the API gateway in a super simple implementation where teams could just give us how quickly they wanted to rate limit someone, how aggressive they wanted to be essentially on that. It's just a small configuration file with some numbers in there, and it puts it all in place for them. It writes the code for them. Caching and purging. Obviously, if we're writing a Fastly service, caching is a huge piece of that. We wanted to give teams the ability to be able to cache at the Fastly layer. Not a lot of teams are leveraging that. We're chaining a lot of services, so usually their Fastly service downstream is handling that caching or the front one. But we do allow teams to be able to put those caching tools in place. And if they're within our infrastructure, they're able to use our cool internal tools like our Slack bot that we've created for them to be able to purge their particular applications without needing to go through API calls or need tokens and things like that. Let's talk about integration testing. This one is obviously never a fun one, but when you're in a multi-tenant environment, you need to really make sure that as you're making changes, you're not going to be affecting other applications. With this handling billions and billions of requests, we want to make sure that if you're making a change to your application, before that gets deployed, we're testing that in CI, we're testing that in a staging environment, and those are done through integration tests. People are able within their application to just create a quick JSON file that has all the tests that they need. And then our application will actually go through and write out their integration tests for them. And then it will run those through those different environments before we do any of those deployments. The last section I want to talk about here is observability. Bilal mentioned that we're sending a lot of metrics over to our logging providers, Sumo Logic, BigQuery, all of those places. What we're doing with that BigQuery data is rolling that up into a generalized Data Studio dashboard. This gives us the ability to let teams come to one centralized place and get a bunch of information about what's happening within FAM. This is the dashboard that kind of shows what FAM looked like on a particular day, October 30th of this year. At the top, you'll see a bunch of filters. Like I said, this is one dashboard that works for everyone. So you're able to go in and filter down to your application. You can particularly say like 200 requests, whatever you'd like to do there. This is showing that you can choose your particular application. And then you can actually time slice that and say, like during the elections event, I want to see particular data for a time slice. We also were able to go through and build what I feel like is a really rich dashboard for errors. This is the entire FAM application broken apart in a kind of scoreboard way. Again, teams are able to isolate this to their own application and then really understand what's happening from an error reporting standpoint, giving themselves and their teams a lot more information about what the end user is experiencing there. So how are we accomplishing these things? We have a few Golang applications that I'm going to talk about in just a second. Those kind of help orchestrate all of that multi-tenancy that I was mentioning earlier. Terraform is obviously a big piece of how we're managing the infrastructure and how that's getting deployed out. And then Vault and GitHub Actions is part of the key management process that I mentioned earlier. So the Golang applications. This is what I feel like is kind of the bread and butter for how we were able to deliver this at such scale internally. We have developed a few Golang applications. Teams do not need to know Go to be able to use FAM at all. These are two applets that are just built within the product that you run. The first of those is the create proxy process. This is if you're bringing a new application on board, you have a new product that you're trying to get out there. It's literally a prompted questionnaire. Teams are able to run through that as a CLI. They answer questions like, what endpoint do you need this to serve on? Do you want your own DNS? Where are the backends? Things like that. It's a very logical just questionnaire. At the end of that, some boilerplate code is generated, and the teams have a really good jumping off point to start kind of customizing their application as they see fit and as their application requires. So once they have that boilerplate code and they've gone in and made some changes, this is where the templater process comes in. This one is super powerful. This one will loop through each of the application's configuration folders and actually start to build out VCL code, Terraform files, and everything based on those simple configuration files that teams were able to develop for their applications. Within those, they have like a config.json. They have their own VCL file that they're able to do all those custom request manipulations and things like that. And then the output files are things like their key management workflows, things that they don't need to worry about that they shouldn't be customizing that are taken care of as part of this product. We're able to accomplish all those things through Terraform. Terraform is able to handle things like our domain registrations. Sharding off that traffic to the right application is done through VCL. We have edge dictionaries. Those are all private so that we're able to keep those keys secure at the edge. And then, like I mentioned, teams are able to implement their own backends and choose how they'd like to do groupings or routings, things like that. And then that logging provides us all of the observability that we're looking for. So at the end of implementing FAM, and as we move things over, like Bilal mentioned, removing that extra infrastructure piece we knew was going to be a big win. We had no idea how big of a win it was going to be. In 2020, right before the elections event that year, we actually moved over to FAM 5 days before the elections. And we were monitoring, obviously, very heavily during that time to see what the response time comparison was from our previous product to our current. It was really awesome to see the blue line here being our previous solution. This is response time in milliseconds. We were averaging around 270 milliseconds to get a elections page loaded to our end users. That's all the way through the pipeline. That is directly to the end user. Once we moved over to FAM, that number dropped 25 to 30%. We were seeing an average closer to like 225 milliseconds for a response time. And obviously for an organization like ours, we're trying to reduce response time by 1%. 25 to 30 was a drastic win for our organization. And then on top of that, just having the overall change management that we have within Fastly, we feel very aware of what we're able to deploy, and we feel like we have complete control over that plane. We didn't feel like that on our previous solution, and we're able to deploy rapidly and make changes as is necessary for events like elections and things where we may have some things that need to change drastically.
All right, so as we come to the tail end of this talk, I want to share with you all some key takeaways and lessons learned for us along this journey of developing this product. So first one, autonomy is always a win. By creating these simple-to-use automation tools such as Templater that Kris went over, investing our time and effort into intuitive guides and trainings, not only we were able to empower our customer teams who were eager to migrate to the new product, we put them in a position where they could continue to develop their configurations, onboard new products with minimum oversight by the SRE team. Next one, less infrastructure is more. As we have touched upon this a few times today, by eliminating that additional piece of infrastructure, not only we reduced our response times and improved performance significantly, we were able to cut down on the management and engineering overhead of managing a different solution at a different platform, as well as cutting down on the cost overall. At the end of the day, we were confined by the cost of this project, and that motivated us to look within our existing infrastructure first before going out into the market and evaluating other vendors. And as a result, we ended up leveraging a lot of the tools and technologies that were already at our disposal. And due to that, we saw benefits all around for that. And from here on, we're really excited to see the further development and journey of FAM in the next 6 to 12 months. We have some really cool ideas and projects in the pipeline that will help take this product into its next generation iteration. So we're really excited about that. And with that, it concludes our talk for today. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you all enjoyed it. And please feel free to connect with us. Thank you.